Are you a business owner stuck in fear, doubt, and worry about what the marketplace will look like in the future? Then this show is for you. Strap on your seatbelt and get ready to disrupt and innovate. Here's your host, Lisa Levy.
Today, we're cutting through one of the biggest myths in business growth, the idea that scaling problems are solved with more tools, better technology, or even AI. Because if you and your team can't explain how their work contributes to the business outcomes, all those other things do is accelerate confusion. Today, you'll learn how high-growth organizations create alignment, accountability, and clarity that actually scales. Joining me is Kurt Uhlir, who helps organizations by scaling. He helps organizations scale by aligning strategy, people, and execution so growth can compound instead of creating chaos. Kurt, welcome to the conversation.
Hey, thank you for having me.
It is absolutely my pleasure. To get things started, I like to help set the context a little bit. So share with the audience in one really simple, really bold statement why you've earned an opinion on scaling organizations.
I've scaled an incredible amount of them. And by that, I've been part of more than 60 funding rounds and exits, including like an $8 billion sale. And I really only care about outcomes at the end of the day.
And really, at the end of the day, that's the only thing any of us should care about. But we'll dig into that a lot in this conversation today. What is a leadership assumption you held early in your career that turned out to be totally wrong?
That the leader had to lead from authority and had to have all of the answers and tell people what to do.
What was the cost of that assumption?
The company was still wildly successful. We had an IPO and then later $8 billion exit. But looking back, I lost the highest performers on my team. They went on to do immaculate things. So I can't imagine how many more billions of dollars we would have made. But then there was a personal toil because I lost the resilience of my team that often I or other people had to pick up on as well.
That is a very specific answer. Thank you for that and being so incredibly clear because that pain and that cost was very, very real. When you're thinking about scale, what is something that most leaders still misunderstand?
When I say servant leadership, they think it's soft or all about empathy.
And what is it really about?
It's about realizing that you've hired people to do jobs or actions that you typically don't want on your plate, which means your entire job is to figure out every day how to serve those people so that they can better get the outcomes that you want.
I think that's a really important distinction, and it's important because I think the misconception about what servant leadership is very prevalent, and it's not soft. And those who lead with it as this is a soft skill approach, I think devalue what it means to an organization and the ability to let other people do the work that in many cases you can't do. And that's why they're there, right? Your job is to make them successful.
Yeah, both for them to do the work, as you said, and also like when I was an authoritative micromanager, because you really there's only the two kinds to me. And so by nature, you may be nice, but you're still micromanaging or trying to. I thought I was, say, weighing in on 1 to 5% of the decisions. I mean, we had a 6,000 person team underneath. In reality, I saw such a small percentage of what I would as a servant leader because servant leaders allow the bad information and the messy middle to bubble up. We still want people to make decisions, but they'll bring us more situations when they don't have things. And so I thought I was making all these decisions before when instead, no, those are being done and shielded from me because we can't tell the boss we don't know.
Because we don't want to appear weak. Yeah. And that's an important thing to be able to open it up so that it is safe to be in a position where you don't know the answer, to raise the question and help find the answer and come to leadership with that vulnerability and saying, we can do this, or this, but I don't know which one will actually make a difference to the company. And then you, as a true leader, can help them find that right answer. Let's dig into this a little bit deeper and what you actually are doing. So when you're starting to work inside of an organization, right, and growth has stalled, what's really happening?
Two things are usually happening. The first is usually even often at the CEO level, but especially at the individual contributor level and everywhere in between. If I go ask the people what outcomes both they're wanting from the company as well as what outcomes their boss is wanting from them and how that ties to the outcomes for the company, nobody can answer those questions. I step in $100 million a year software service businesses and nobody can answer that question. Like my role, here's the outcomes they want from my role and how that ties to the company outcomes. And I'm so surprised. And the second thing that happens is they either are only looking at outcomes and optimizing for outcomes in the next 2 to 12 months, or they actually are doing something like I have my own framework for it, but they are looking at different temporal timeframes and segmenting that. But they do not have a framework or an operations way that allows them to stay within, say, 2 to 12 months, 12 to 36 month plus. And so they literally will go between those in the same meeting. And maybe a leadership level can deal with that for those of us that have been in companies for 30 years. But at the individual contributor level, that feels like I have to only focus on tomorrow, what happened by Saturday, and so they're either they don't have that temporal view or they're muddying the waters when they talk about it.
And one of the things that in that you're talking about, right? It can become confusing for anybody inside of the organization when we switch from thinking and talking strategically, operationally, and tactically. And when you start talking about those different time frames, right? Tactics are and that near-term horizon. Operationally, we may look at a larger time horizon. Strategically, we could be looking out 3 years, 5 years. I don't know that I believe in much beyond that at this point in time, although Japanese companies still plan for 100 years. So
Even within each one of those, even within those three, and I agree with that, I still will approach each of those three on each of those timeframes differently because you're still tactical. I get typically hired by a VC, PE, or family office backed company. And so even for like that 36-month window, we may only say we're going to put 1 to 2% of my resources underneath me as a CMO towards that. We still may think about strategically, tactically, and whatnot. But like in my case, I'm not tracking lagging indicators like I would be on the 2 to 12 month. What we will put in place and agree today with the leading indicators we're going to track for the next 3 years are. So we're still going to be very tactical when we're looking at all of that. The specific things we'll be tracking on leading versus lagging. But even within that, it's still entirely staying within that time frame. And then to your point, a strategic discussion is different than a tactical discussion. We may strategically talk about 1 to 3 years. And then, all right, the next meeting or the next half of that meeting, say, all right, now tactically, how do we actually implement the things we've just agreed we want?
okay, so I appreciate you giving dimension to the fact that it's not an either or, right? The levels of the organization and the time horizons do actually play together and are pertinent. Thank you for calling me out on that oversimplification on my part. As you're working with the teams, right, and working with individuals and teams and leadership, with the framework that you're talking through, walk through the framework at a high level and what that means to the organization.
Yeah. So I look at there's two different ways that I look at framework. One is just completely that time frame perspective from a temporal perspective, but more than that, within those time frames, I have an outcome line of sight framework. I want everybody to be able to talk about the outcomes and clearly identify the business outcomes that we're expecting from your role. I am paying you tens of thousands of dollars on a monthly basis. I'm paying for medical for you and your family, maybe giving you equity. What are the outcomes that I'm wanting in each of those time frames, and making sure that the people can explain that back. Just like I said, almost never they can. So then you have to figure out how do you get from where the people are without having like triggering shame triggers from people and say, okay, I'm not paying you to answer phones or to do marketing or post social media. I want the outcome. So let's now slowly go through that outcome line of sight framework that says in each of those time horizons, I need you to identify the different outcomes that you think I'm expecting from you. And then I'll kind of recorrect that as well.
Do you connect that to the customer journey?
I do. It depends on the type, where we're at in the organization, or as the CMO, the role that I have as a CMO. I just say that because I usually will have dual roles. I will both have the traditional go-to-market role, but I also believe that the CMO, he or she, is ultimately the single person that is responsible for shepherding the entire cohesive view of the customer across the company. So somebody who's never heard of our brand until they've been a loyal customer for 10 years. Now, the chief product officer, he or she should have a strong input, head of engineering, sales. But at the end of the day, most of these companies, when I step into them, they're $100 million a year. And all of them, when I go in these quiet rooms, they all have very different views of what they think the customer is. And I'm
Mhm.
like, well, no, my job as the CMO partially is to make sure that we all have a healthy disagreement until we agree on this is what our customer's day in the life looks like,
Yeah.
down to the level, to your point about customer journey. Like they've never heard of us, to I want the office manager to know the budget line item somebody's paying us $60,000 on, as well as what else is on their budget. And what else are they doing with their time for our customers or the decision maker that's different than using our product? Because that's part of the customer journey that I think most people miss. It's not just what are they doing with our product, it's what else is going on in their life.
Absolutely. And I ask the question because I have a lot of conversations around looking at business operating processes, how the business runs. And if you can't connect what you do, first and foremost, to a business outcome, but also to something that influences or impacts your client or customer, you need to question why you're doing it.
Absolutely.
And so
Yeah.
that was a random Lisa curiosity. Thank you for indulging.
No, I agree with that to the point that the two things that I think most all chief marketing officers should fight for is to get budget for your product team to have something like Amplitude, a true product level usage, and then to own customer success. Because both of those are going to your point about the customer journey. Are we building features that people aren't using, which could be an onboarding issue, could be a product value perspective, could be somewhere else that we have in training. But as well as like from the customer success, like we can argue about whether or not you close tickets, or my viewpoint is you keep a bug ticket open for 12 years if you've decided to not solve that problem. I want everybody to know that's still existing for this customer. But the data between those two is the reality that the rest of us really can't argue with. That's gravity. The rest of it has to be then how do we make sense of that reality?
Absolutely. So I want to dig into the type of a story where we actually can learn something. I want to get to the part where people like to skip over and glaze over the experience where everything went wrong, right? There was something you did all of the right things for all of the right reasons, and the results just weren't what you wanted them to be. Can you share a story like that with us?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I have too many of those. I mean, most people would crawl under a table and die. The things that I look at is so like we'd help sell a marketing technology company into a public company. I've done that a few times and stay on with the with the public company for a while. And the company's growing wildly. To your point, like we've looked at the customer journey, like during COVID and whatnot, sales have gone through the roof while the rest of the market actually kind of imploded. And yet still at the end of the day, so one, like we're growing, budget's growing, customers are getting more and more value. And yet still then there's a discussion now we have at the board level that says, we're glad we've acquired this company. We've taken the technology we need for our things, but we don't want this technology here. We don't want this company to be run here anymore. It's dropping a bunch of money to the bottom line, but it doesn't fit with this strategy. And so that then gets the thing. It's not that you've done anything wrong. It's just that where the board and everyone is viewing that the company is going, this subsidiary doesn't match with that. And so one, you then have to start thinking about how do we hand this off? And so that could be something to talk about, but as well as like, how do you hand it off in a way that both doesn't hurt the parent company and hopefully still protects the asset, which includes the people that you're going to divest at some point.
So that's a very tricky situation to navigate, and I appreciate that in that you acknowledged that both businesses need to be cared for, but the people inside them as well, right? Because that is a divestiture is a terrifying experience for the employees of that company. They have no idea what tomorrow holds.
Absolutely. And it's one of those things where like we hear all these people that they badmouth private equity companies and our funds. And it's like, okay, some of them make decisions where it seems like they're slashing and burning, but most are not doing that. They're wanting to grow value. And what often happens is where you do hear these negative stories for things, they're not intending to erode value. What happened was they were trying to extract some cost savings, hoping they could do the flip for that next level. And the timing just didn't play out. The last thing any of them are wanting to do is take a unbound risk and say, hey, we're going to get rid of a huge amount of people that have the institutional knowledge, the resilience to fix the product or the service or sales. And then something happens. And it's like, but that's the same mentality though, that happens so often is if you don't think about the people, which often like those of us in marketing and product and innovation, we're thinking about those things because there's also like, there's all this, legacy debt from a technical perspective we have to solve or marketing debt. Well, that's a discussion I have to have. And often like it's the people team that are going to go fight for us and be like, yeah, it's going to cost a little bit more, but it lowers our risk later in case something happens. Because at the end of the day, the people are the ones that are implementing.
Yeah. And it is the institutional knowledge, right? There's statistics. Policies, processes, and procedures represent about 40% of the knowledge that it takes for a business to operate successfully. The other 60% is stuck inside of everybody's head, right? It's the magic that they perform every day. So when you're going through that experience of, my God, what are we going to do? That's when, to an earlier part of your description, right? Your best people are the first ones to leave because they are highly marketable. Your high performers will jump and go. And the impact to that over time is painful. Let's talk a little bit about, in this story, right, with that divestiture as the natural next outcome. What did it break?
Well, it broke a lot of things. The first thing it broke was, it actually broke leadership's thought, because I've come from a marketing technology that we've sold in, and now I'm an executive with a holding company of which owns quite a few companies and one massive company. And I start asking them about what are the outcomes that people are expecting? What's the outcome the board's wanting from your role? And I'm amazed. This is a big company. Like, they didn't know. Of course, you don't necessarily expect the visionary CEO to weigh in on that. He had some thoughts. He's like, they want me to make another $5 billion. That was kind of his response. But nobody on the executive team reporting to this the billionaire CEO or the next two levels could reasonably answer that question. One person that led this innovation team could. And other than that, so it started to it kind of broke the minds of all of them, but it also broke our relationships a little bit at the beginning, because now I'm the person that's new into the team. Now, granted, they were expecting a lot from that, but I'm the one that's in there in a good way, helping stir the pot, while at the same time asking for massive amounts of more money, because that now subsidiary is like 5% of my effort. And I have a 95% role that's with the parent company, helping build all this technology and implement things there. And so they're like, wait a second, you're asking for like $5 to $7 million more for all of this, and yet you're asking all these questions that we don't like. And at the end of the day, they keep in mind, like, it is the people then that are going to authorize your budget too. So, but those questions have to be answered, both to make sure that I'm asking for the right amount of money to do the right thing, but also, am I truly aligning with what I think they're wanting to do? I have nothing wrong with move fast and break things, but like, let's make sure we're breaking the right things in the right direction, at least.
And sometimes breaking things is important. In this scenario, it happened maybe without intent, but coming back into, again, your framework and two very simple questions when things become uncertain, when things deviate from where you thought they were going to be. Two questions help bring everybody back to that alignment of understanding, what is my outcome? What outcomes do I drive for the business? And how do those outcomes drive the business forward? It's a really clean and simple model. As you have with the experience in it that you've had, have people pushed back and argued against this simple two-question framework? Where's
Yeah,
the resistance?
because especially the more senior people are, but not just within from a hierarchy perspective, but also the more years that they have, they tend to want to go along with what feels like should come from like a 25-year-old, where they're like, you just know this, or we know this, like, let's just move on. And I'm like, well, no, like, it is that Albert Einstein thing. If you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, you don't truly know it. And like, and I just went and asked 5 people that report to you, and they didn't have an answer, or here's the answers they gave me. And so that's often where I'll get the pushback is, well, we all just know this. And so it's happened so much with both me as a senior executive as well as being on the board, that I will come in already with like, here's the thing, like, I've done my homework. I have 5 to 10 examples where I will prove to you if need be. And you always have to prove to people that push back, that says, no, clearly you might know, but your organization doesn't.
And it's a principle that many would refer to as, understanding testing the tone from the top, right? And being, what does the CEO say? And then what does the junior person who's just been in the contact center for 90 days? How does that translate down to that individual and everybody in between? And getting it to say and mean the same things top to bottom and bottom to top it's art. And very few companies do it well.
Yeah, I was CEO for a venture-backed company for a while before I realized I was better as a kingmaker or a queenmaker. My wife had pointed that out, and then a bunch of my mentors around were like, yes, that we would have told you that if you would have asked. But she pointed out, she was like, I realize how much you actually need to tell people for them to start getting it. You need to tell people on your team so frequently what you expect out of them that it annoys me. And I don't share an office. I happen to hear on phone calls, sometimes at home or in the car. When I'm starting to get annoyed, it's barely starting to sink through most of the.
That is a very personal story, and I think that it's really true, right? The people who kind of are around us in our new world, where we're in our homes more often than not anymore, what they hear us saying, right? They kind of hear the repetition in it, but the actual impact to the person on the receiving end of the message, who is juggling all of their priorities, the tasks of the day and whatever it is, Communication is a slow and painful process, and you have to say it again, and at some point it will be heard and the feedback loop closed.
Yes. I agree with that. I find I'm more trained in doing this now, but usually when I step into a new team, I'm having to train my peers at this point because it's not just asking those two questions. It's asking those questions and then not doing what most of us do as leaders is either assuming kind of the win or pushing back, being defensive when people kind of like come back. Is the only questions that you can ask besides those two are either what did you mean by that? What led you to that conclusion? Or have you considered? Those are three deep level curiosity questions to bring out the actual understanding of the two questions that we walk through in the framework. And they're curiosity wise. And if at any point you're defensive and you're pushing back or giving like you're in trouble if you don't know this, no, those are the only three things, or it shuts off the information that you actually need.
Yeah. And in asking questions like that, one of the things that I throw out with clients is I don't want the words that are painted on the wall. Right? I'm not looking for mission, vision, values. Those are great. That's not what I'm asking you to. I don't want the company line, regurgitated back to me. I want to know exactly what you do that matters. And thank you for bringing it in and using the word curiosity, because as a leader and looking and trying to elicit that feedback, one, we have to, if it's our company, if we're a consultant, it's a little easier, but when we're inside the business and we're emotionally invested in it, right, we have to become objective and curious and not take it personally and not get defensive and go, oh my God, Kurt, I can't believe you don't know what that's supposed to be. That helps nobody. Can you give me a situation where this approach is not the right tool?
There's really not a situation where it's not the right tool. The only case where I step away from it somewhat is in deep triage situations. And so I've done a lot of true rescue operations and recovery operations for people that are lost and bodies even. And so like we do have those situations in companies as well. So in the deep triage, like in when literally minutes or seconds matter, you can't go back, slow down and ask all this. But even very quickly, like I would show up earlier in my life where I would moonlight leading rescue operations for things. And let's say there's somebody who's elderly with dementia that's lost out. We don't know where, somewhere in 20 square miles. It always helps to slow down, make sure that there's a plan, and make sure every person knows what the outcomes you want from them. Otherwise, things will get missed in those situations. And so it changes the type of questions you ask and how quickly people need to iterate on what's called like an OODA loop to figure that out. The new information you get new information.
Absolutely fantastic. And I agree, right? There's a time and a place, and it's not that it's the wrong tool, it's the wrong time. And that's important. So I want to jump into a lightning round where I'm going to ask a handful of quick questions just so that we can get a sense of how you think and what really matters to you as a leader. Kurt, one metric, if you could only track one, what's the magic metric?
Marketing qualified leads.
Okay, love that. What is a leadership habit that if you had the power, you would ban tomorrow?
Great question. Weekly report outs from people.
Fantastic. We haven't talked much about at all. We did not talk about AI at all in this conversation, but I want to throw in one question. What is one AI use case that leaders currently overvalue?
Getting it to write content that they're shipping out to people.
It's a great one. And based on what we've talked about today, what's one simple task that anybody who's listening can go on and leverage tomorrow?
Add to every one of your one-on-ones the question simply to ask the person you're doing the one-on-one with, what could I be wrong about in the business that I think I'm right about?
Okay, that's a powerful place to end the lightning round. This conversation has been fantastic, and we have talked through the power and impact of outcomes. We've talked through the reality, and Curtis shared with us that activity is not the same thing as an outcome. And we have scale it breaks down when people lose the line of sight between their work and the business goals. And one of the things that was sprinkled in there very gently, but I want to hit again as a key takeaway, is that curiosity is a place for us as leaders where we can ask and learn anything and be non-threatening, and we will learn more about what's going on in the business around us than any other way, because curiosity is human nature, and it was something that we did really well in kindergarten, and as adults we have forgotten how to do it. Kurt, if this conversation has piqued curiosity from the audience, how do they find you and learn more?
Come to my personal website, Kurt Uhlir, UHLIR.com. And I have a lot of writings on there. And if it'll send you to different places. If you want more business stuff, it'll send you to LinkedIn. Or if you want to watch me drive my emotional support skid steer with my 7-year-old, it'll send you to Instagram.
Well, I'm going to have to go find that video. Audience members, you know my rules. Don't get left behind. Join me next time.
That's it for today's episode of Disrupt and Innovate.